Welcome to another episode of the Co-Elevate podcast with Shayna. I have a very special guest on all the way from Europe. Her name is Cami, and today we're diving into all things sexuality because what I'm about to tell you might be hard to believe. It's very intriguing, and I'm so excited that Cami, you're willing to open up about this. But you have been in a relationship with men your entire life. You're 28 years old, and this is your first time being in a relationship with a woman. So I'm pumped that you're going to talk about what this was like to explore a different side of yourself that you didn't even know existed, and how you were able to break through some of the fears or even the shame that come with coming to terms with your sexuality, because that's a big one right there. So, welcome. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I want to ask, because I'm very curious, is I want you to tell us about the moment that you knew in your gut that you had feelings for a girl after all these years of only being with men. Was it something that happened just randomly on the spot? Was it that you developed feelings over time? I imagine it was kind of difficult to work through knowing that you had feelings for a woman. So bring us into that initial moment where you really knew maybe you want to go the other way.
Absolutely. It was actually a funny story because when I saw her the first time, I told myself I had this curiosity. That was my initial reaction. I saw her the first time and I could not stop looking at her. When I looked at her, I hadn't even talked to her, but just looking at her, it made me feel a way that I called it curiosity. And I think if it was a man, I would have known what it is, but it took me a couple of years to really give myself into the situation. And after running away from her like two times ish, I was in Chile on a trip. I traveled the world and I couldn't sleep at night. And I just had to ask myself, I was reading this spiritual book at that moment, and the book said something like this. If you are struggling with something, you can't just take a pill. You have to go deep and find out what is the root cause of it. I was like, oh, the root cause of it, that's my mom. My mom, all of my issues. I was like, I'm gonna call my mom. So I called my mom and I said, Mom, I think I'm in love with a woman. And I was like, okay, so what? And she made no big deal out of it. And I thought that she was gonna think it was, I don't know, I'm not gonna be your mother anymore type of thing. And when she said that, I think it allowed me to really okay, I think I really like her. And I still didn't admit it to myself 100%. It was this constant battle with me, I guess. And it's funny because I never had any problems with other people liking whoever they liked. But when it happens to us, I guess it's different. So I bought a plane ticket and I bought a flight and I went back to Peru, where my partner is from. And I spent a month with her to find out what would happen. And then, I mean, we've never really been apart ever since. So it started kind of there.
So let me ask you something since you brought this up. When you noticed you had a couple underlying fears about being with a woman for the first time, the first person that you called was your mom. Is the reason that you called your mom because you were most afraid of her reaction to you being attracted to a woman, or why do you bring up your mom?
That's a good question. I had been working for a long time on myself, all of my traumas and wanting to peel the layers off. And specifically in this moment, I was working really hard in my relationship with my mom and my dad around 2 years ago. And we were not close at all. I would never tell her such thing, even if it was for a man before. Like, I'm in love with someone, it was just out of topic. But I think I was defying defying our relationship, trying to push and pull the boundaries and see what would happen. And it was a coincidence, I guess, at that moment to be calling her. My friends, they kind of knew about it. I had debating that in my head for a long time at that point. So my friends all knew, but I think I was somehow looking for um, her to disapprove it for me to say I'll go for it. But she did the opposite of what I expected. And then it turned out to be super cool because she asked me in that call. We had a very vulnerable and nice conversation, and I think we never had it before. She said, like, if it was a man, would you go back and see the man? Like, would you try to find out what's going to happen? And I said, probably. She said, then why wouldn't you do it? If she can't come to you because of work and she tried, why can't you go to her if you can? And I was like, oh, I think you've got a point. And I said, I'm going to think about it. And then I shut the phone and like looked up Google the flights and I just booked right after and then I was like, I'm gonna try. I have always lived my life by risks. I'm gonna take risks and see what happens. If it goes wrong, I know I will have tried at least. So that's what I did, and we have been traveling the world together for over a year now, and yeah.
So, thank you for sharing all this because I know this is personal and vulnerable, like you said. I want to go back to this conversation that you had with your mom only because I think a lot of people who are struggling with their sexuality or who are confused about who they are or who they're attracted to, they
Mhm.
often are terrified to express how they really feel because they're afraid of their family or friends or the world's judgment. And I would think that a lot of people who um, don't feel free in their sexuality probably don't feel free because they're not willing to
Mhm.
confront what people might think of them if they do pursue whoever they're attracted to. So I'm glad that you brought this conversation up because what I'm hearing you say is that the reason you called your mom after becoming clear that you were interested in a woman is because you were looking to her to give yourself permission to pursue a possible relationship with this girl. And if she approved, that was like your green light. But if she disproved, maybe that was going to be your way of kind of like taking steps back and reconsidering whether or not you wanted to actually explore what there was with this woman, right?
I think it was a bit of the opposite because my mom and we always had a very difficult relationship, and I always wanted to do the opposite of what she told me. So I was expecting her to say that that was absurd and I was not going to be her daughter anymore or something like that. But it came all the way on the other way around, and it was a big surprise to me. And I guess it was a relief because I was always expecting that my mom would love me no matter what. That's what I deep down wanted. But that I always felt like I didn't get my whole life. So that moment, I think something inside of me got to like have a big healing moment. And it was beautiful. What was the rest of your question again? So I got lost.
No, I was clarifying what I heard you say to make sure that we were on the same page. And that's why it's great to be able to ask questions in live format like this because you're kind of clarifying. I don't know a lot about your relationship with your mom, so I'm just curious about that dynamic because like I said, there's a lot of people who right now are holding themselves
Hmm.
back because they are afraid of what their parents might think or even their friends. And for the people who are in that situation, who might have parents who are judgmental or friends who have made comments about people that have different sexualities. Um, what would you say to someone who's like too afraid to come to terms with themselves because they know that the people around them have some preconceived judgments or misconceptions about that sexuality?
Absolutely. From my experience, I think the most difficult acceptance came from myself. I felt like everyone around me accepted me in a way that was completely unexpected, that they were way better, and I can share stories about that. That I was preparing myself for war and I was warmed up and I was like, I'm gonna deal with this. It's gonna be really hard. But everyone was so kind, including my grandma. She's gonna be 80 years old. But it came from within, And before telling all of my friends, I did hesitate a lot. That was hard for me. Even my closest friends, I would think that if it was the other way around and they wanted to tell me, like, hey, I'm in love with a woman, like, I would be, okay, cool, like, tell me more about this person. I don't care if it's a woman or not. But when it was me sharing with them, I did feel like a lot of struggled because I was like, oh, are they gonna think that when I was in their bedroom, like sleeping together, that I had some sort of thoughts in my head? Or are they gonna judge me? Like, are they gonna feel like I had second intentions with them? And I started overthinking in so many ways. That was never the case. But what I told myself to do it was like, I really want to have genuine friends around me that they love me 100% for who I am. So if that's who I am, like I want them to like me. If they don't, I don't want them in my life. That's okay. It's gonna be hard, but I don't want them. And even if I don't like her and I go and I try this thing and it doesn't work out, if they were not willing to accept me going through this journey, like that's not the kind of people I want to hang out with. And I had that happen with one friend. I lost one of my best friends because I felt like she was always very open minded. I don't think she had the best acceptance and it hurt me so much. It's still hard. So today I just decided to leave the relationship because I wanted to be accepted for who I am. And in regards to family, I think that I was in a position that was completely different than most people that want to come out because I think if you are in a closet and you know 100% that you are gay or whatever and you want to come out to your parents, usually there's this dependence relationship of money or you live under their roof. I had been independent for 6 years. I lived away from my family years at a time, like hadn't seen them in 3 years, and then I would go back to visit for a little bit. So I was preparing myself in this way. That was always my coping mechanism since I was a kid. If you say something that I don't like, I will leave. That's why I became a traveler and I've been traveling for so long. But I was like, if they don't accept me, okay, I'm gonna go to Thailand very far. Like, I'm fine. And the result was the opposite. And I think it's because they were also scared that I would just go far away if they didn't have a nice reaction. And because I had been healing my relationship with them for a while, everyone had amazing reactions. Even when people didn't know how to act, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah, I'm really happy for you that overall people's response to you being in a relationship with a woman for the first time was very positive because we know that that's not the case for everyone.
No,
And that's
they
why I
think the
want to talk
opposite. Yeah.
about, yeah, that's why I want to talk about that component of this whole story because it hurts my heart to know that there are people out there who can't fully come into their own sexuality or just their authentic self
Yeah.
because they have people in their life who will not tolerate them being anyone other than who they want the person to be. And
Yeah.
that is such a prison to keep yourself in, to say, well, I'm only going to be this person because this is what other people expect of me, and this is what's acceptable by society standards. And what
Hmm.
I say to this question that I'm posing to you about somebody who is afraid to accept their sexuality because of judgment from others is that you can only stay in your own prison for so long, your own prison of judgment and shame and blending in and fitting in, all those things that feel so contained and constricting. You can only stay in that energy for so long before eventually you just want to break out of that shell entirely and just live a life that's authentic to who you really are, because that's a privilege and a birthright that every single one of us should have, is to be able to live as our authentic self. And we know that doesn't happen in many parts of the world and in many families, even here in the United States. So if you are that person that is just confused about your sexuality or is afraid to accept any part of who you are that might not be considered normal or
Hmm.
typical, I really just want you to know that you owe it to yourself to give yourself complete permission and freedom to live out your authentic self because that is what I believe we're all put here on earth to do, is to live our
Mhm.
authentic selves, inspire other people to do the same. Because what is life if you don't have the freedom to be who you authentically are? That sounds like just a living hell to me. And so, yeah, that's why I bring this up. I think that that would be the number one thing that would come to mind to me is like, oh my God, what are people going to think? And also, if I live such a different life than what is normal, what is seen on TV and in movies,
Mhm.
like, how will that affect my own happiness? Will I like my own life? Will I feel like I have FOMO because other people are experiencing something that I'm not, etc. I think that there is just a lot to unpack in looking at really accepting the differences about yourself.
So much. It's actually funny you say that because I remember like 1 month and a half into the relationship, I went back to Lima, where my partner is from, and we just kind of like moved in together because we're from different countries. There's not much more that you can do to really find out. And we would go out to go to the movies or to eat, and Peru is completely different than the US, for example, about being open about that. You can't just hold hands on the street and you feel super awkward and scared. That's a whole different topic. But I remember I would see the outdoors, like perfume or like clothing brands and stuff like that on the street, and it was always a woman and a man. And I started getting angry at the outdoors. I was like, why is it like that? Why is all I didn't watch any movies for months because I didn't want to see a man and a woman, because every time I did, it triggered me. I was like, I don't belong. It's not like me. Like, I don't want to be like that. And until today, honestly, I don't think I have figured out the whole thing. Yesterday, my partner and I, we were having a conversation about moments of realizations that I had about my past, or when we watched a TV show from Netflix that it has a bunch of teens that they are openly about all of these types of sexualities, and there's all sorts of sexualities. After watching the TV show, my partner told me, I feel like you love me more after we watched this. And I was like, oh, wow. It probably is because I can feel more open to the idea. Still, I'm opening up, you know?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very important to note that growing up, what we see on TV and in popular culture, it's usually heterosexual relationships. It's a man and a woman. We've been conditioned to believe that that's normal and that's the only way to live your life. And luckily, as a society, we've become a lot more progressive and accepting of different ways of living and ways of being. And I'm very
Mm-hmm.
happy that I live in a time that's like that now, but you still
Mm-hmm.
have different religions that preach, certain things
Mm-hmm.
as only being right or acceptable. And you have different parts of the world that, there's certain standards and certain things that are off limits. So it's just everybody is in a different environment culturally and socially. And it brings its own set of challenges for different people depending on what kind of communities they live in or they're raised in, right? Someone who grew up with an extremely religious background may have a lot different of ideologies than I have because I wasn't raised religious and there were no rules about how I needed to be growing up,
Mm-hmm.
right? I didn't follow what it said in certain religious texts, none of that. So yeah, everybody's in a different space in their life. And so much of it, I believe, is from the way that we were raised and what was considered normal for us growing up. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that point up because I think there's a lot of like challenges that come with knowing that you're breaking the stereotypes or you're challenging the norm, which is something you're doing. And I think that's actually something to be proud of because we are not a one size fits all in society, right? We're not all meant to be clones of each other. We're not all meant to have the same sexuality. We're not all meant to be the same gender. Like the beauty of society is the fact that we are all our own individuals, right? Like, how boring would it be if all the people in our life were exactly the same as us? And I think as a society, we need to become more accepting, even more so than we are today, about things like sexuality, for example. Um,
Yes.
and I just want to touch a little bit about like how I can relate to what you're saying about this sense of belonging. Because I heard you say, man, when I would see men and women constantly on advertisements or in magazines for certain products like perfumes and stuff, it would make me question how I belong in the world. Let's just dive into that whole concept. One of the things Brene Brown talks about, she's like a famous researcher on vulnerability and shame and belonging,
Yeah.
right? She talks about these things on stage and in her books. She discusses this difference between fitting in and belonging, which I think is
Mhm.
really interesting. She basically says that kind of like the goal is to belong to yourself and not actually to fit in, because fitting in requires you to change who you are, whereas belonging requires you to be who you authentically are. And
Yeah.
so when it comes to sexuality, my God, is this so important to understand? Like, the goal is not for you to necessarily fit in, it's actually to learn how to accept yourself, which is what you said was actually the hardest thing. It wasn't gaining the approval of other people, it was gaining the approval of yourself, knowing, hey, maybe I am different. Maybe my sexuality is not the same as all my friends, and that's okay.
Mhm. Yes, 100%. And it's funny because in theory, I always thought I was so open-minded, but when it happened, I had so many moments to peel layers of an onion, I guess I could say, until today. But I remember this one time I was living in Peru with my partner. We were not officially together at that point. I was struggling a lot to figure it out if I liked her. I think I was blocking myself from feeling things because I was just scared. Um, and we went on a 3-day trip with a couple that they were her friends. So we were four in the trip. And the first day we went to this desert type of canyon and they all fell asleep. And I was just looking out the window by myself. And the rest of the people, they were all sleeping or talking. And I was just like, I remember I was looking out the window and I started feeling this like needle like in my chest, like, and I was like, okay, what am I feeling? Like, what's happening? Why am I feeling this way right now? I'm supposed to be happy, like traveling like the to this like incredible place. And I felt the same feeling of every time I attended a funeral. Like it was so painful. It was so hard for me to cope. I wanted to desperately cry at that moment and I couldn't understand. And I kept asking myself, like, okay, what am I feeling? What is this? And I thought about the life that I imagined I would have one day, that I was going to be married to a man and I was going to have a bunch of kids and they were all going to be white, and that I was going to have this certain type of a house. And like this movie started like crossing my head. And I was like, okay, if I fall in love with her, that means I'm questioning all of this that I thought was my life for sure. I didn't know when was gonna happen, who was gonna be. Not my ex-boyfriends, definitely not. All toxic, not great relationships aside from my first boyfriend. But it was really hard to see that go. And I had to tell myself that if I choose to do this, I have to let go of that idea. That doesn't walk together anymore. Okay, I can have kids, but it will be different. And I felt sad. I felt sad, and then I didn't share with my partner. I just kept it to myself. I didn't want to like dump all that on her. Like, oh, falling in love with you is like a funeral to me, like not the thing you tell the person that you like. And then couple days after, I started having this new vision of what it could be like. And then I started thinking, like, okay, if it is her in this situation, like, how is my life gonna look like? And it's really funny because it felt like it fits me a lot better than what I thought it was. I was like, oh, I still want to have a family. I want to have kids. That's something I've always wanted, I guess. And she's an architect. Like we could have this pretty cool different sort of house. She's not white and that's 100% okay. And like who said all these things? Like, why do I, why? Like, why were all these things inside of me? No one one day ever sat me down and said, you're gonna fall in love for a man and it's gonna be like this and that. And it, it somehow was all inside of me, and I guess is inside of all of us. I knew I had the privilege of coming out in an easy way. But mostly it's definitely not like that. But all this little drops that were planted inside of us in a way, they are so present, and I'm still taking them out, removing them every single day. It's a big challenge, but I felt I could be a lot more of myself on the other side, and I didn't even know that was a possibility until the day that I felt this curiosity for her that I could not push it to the side. And I think looking back that I felt that way for other people, but because it was not as strong as it was for her, I never paid attention because I had all these layers of whatever society put on me. I always just chose to be with men, which I definitely liked it too. Um, but it's a lot of work, but I feel like it's really rewarding because I'm finding out more of who I am every day.
Dang, I can't imagine being in your shoes in that moment where you're basically grieving this whole life that you thought you were going to have. It's like it's so many emotions, probably like a whirlwind that just hits you all at once because you see your future as being a certain way. Some of us have dreamed out our future since we were little kids, you know? And then
Hmm.
overnight, it's suddenly like, well, I guess I have to reimagine everything about my future and come to terms with the fact that my, future might look entirely different than what I thought it would and what other people might have thought it was going to look like for me. That's a lot. That's a hard pill to swallow. And I'm so happy you're bringing that up because I think that's an important part of like addressing or accepting your sexuality is just understanding that the way that your life looks years down the line could be very different than how your friends or your families look, or even how you thought your own life was going to look. But
Yeah.
that's a huge personal breakthrough to have as you're navigating such like unfamiliar territory for the first time in your life.
Yes, it did take a lot of courage, honestly. I felt like I had to make the decision to be brave and pursue it because I could easily just go the other way and be who I was before. That was my comfort zone. And because I had been practicing being discomfort for so long, I think it was just the right moment for me to take that leap. I never had this strong need to be with a woman when I was younger. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of people, most people. Otherwise, they would stay in their closet because life is just easier that way. And it was just this really big feeling that I called curiosity that I had for my partner. And it made me want to take action on it. I couldn't sleep at night, and I was just like, I need to do something about it.
What you're saying actually reminds me a lot of something that I read in Glennon Doyle's book Untamed. Glennon Doyle is an author, speaker. She is incredible at weaving together stories. And in this book, Untamed, she talks about really like disentangling all these beliefs that we're conditioned to have. And one of the things she talks about is the story of how she left her marriage to a man whom she had kids with and randomly fell in love with a woman and pursued this relationship. She's still with her to this day. And I remember her discussing in the book the moment that she had seen her now wife and how something just came over her where she knew intuitively that this woman was like meant to play a very significant role in her life. And she was drawn to this woman in a way that she had never been drawn to someone before, like romantically. And I remember
Hmm.
reading that and thinking, my God, if that happened to me, if I was in Glennon Doyle's shoes and I suddenly saw like another woman in a room and just had this intuitive knowing that I was like attracted to her, that I was meant to date her or be in love with her or whatever it was, I would have to follow that gut knowing despite it not being normal or weird or stigmatized. I just know I would have to because that would be how I would experience like freedom and peace in my life. And like you said, you kind of would lay your head down at night and you would kind of be curious and wonder what would it be like for you to pursue a relationship with your now partner. I just think if I was in that position, I would have to do the same. I would have to pursue what it is that I was curious about, even if it went against society's norms. Um, so I want to bring that up because that part of the book was just so like monumental, where I was like,
Hmm.
God, what would I do if I was ever in that situation? It seems like a
You
really
know what?
moment.
I actually had read the book and I remembered. And I went back to her podcast and I started listening to some stuff. And that also helped me to have courage to buy my plane ticket to really go after her too. I was like, okay, I'm not the only one. It's okay for me to do this. I cannot imagine how people did it many years ago. It felt like everything was put in my life to make my life easier.
Yeah, it's so wonderful that we have people like Glennon Doyle who are normalizing things like same sex relationships. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of how we're progressing as a society, is bringing people's stories to light the way you're doing today
Mm.
on my podcast. One of the things that I wanted to go back to was the topic we talked about of just like belonging, because personally, I've struggled with that when it comes to sexuality. For a long time, I questioned my sexuality as well, because I noticed that I was very different than everyone else my age. The way my friends were attracted to guys is not what I experienced. And I had very little experience. In fact, I didn't have my first kiss until I was almost 19. So I didn't have any physical relationship with guys for a long time. And in that period of time, you can bet that I was on Google late at night, some nights,
Hmm.
typing in, like, if I've never kissed a guy and I'm 19 years old, what does that mean about my sexuality? I was very concerned for myself because I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be different. Like, does this mean I'm asexual? Does this mean I'm gay because I haven't had my first kiss yet and all these other girls have like already had sex? I just didn't
Hmm.
understand like how I fit into the picture. And I was worried about my future and like if there was something wrong with me. And now I know there's nothing wrong with me. And years after I had panicked about my sexuality, I came across this term, demisexuality. And when I read about it, it basically said that if you're demisexual, your physical attraction for someone builds as you have an emotional bond with them, and you don't necessarily think about hooking up or making out with a guy before you really know his character, his values, his family, all these very intricate, in depth things about him. And I thought, wow, that's always been me. Always. I've never just looked at a guy and thought, oh, I can't wait to hook up with him. I just want to make
Hmm.
out with him. I never had those thoughts. Sure, I think certain guys are attractive when I look at them, but what thought I go to is, let me get to know them. Let me see what their character is really like before I ever engage in any physical activity with them. I'm not
Hmm.
religious. I don't have beliefs about like, um, I don't have beliefs that were ingrained in me from childhood that I needed to be like conservative or modest or wait to engage with any physical activities with men, because I literally just came out of the womb like this. And I believe that sexuality is a natural thing that we are born into. I don't believe we wake up one day and we just like force ourselves to be someone that like I just don't buy into that. I think that it's a very, what we're interested in sexually is a very natural thing that comes to us. And anyway, why I bring this up is just because I too went through kind of a dark period of time in my life where I was terrified that my sexuality was different from the norm. And it was, and it is. My sexuality of being demisexual is a little different than almost every single woman that I'm personally friends with. I think I have
Wow.
a handful of friends that also consider themselves demisexual. But for a lot of years, I didn't know anybody that was like me. And you can imagine the isolation that comes with knowing my sexuality is different. And I don't know a single person in my life that can really understand the challenges I have. I actually specifically remember I was on a FaceTime call with a friend and she was talking about childhood crushes. And she said, Shayna, who was your childhood crush growing up? Like, didn't you have like a poster in your room with a guy that you would pretend to kiss? And I thought to myself, no. And when I told her that, she said to me, what are you, asexual? And in that moment, I remember thinking, oh my God, am I? Am I asexual because I didn't have like a poster of a boy in my bedroom that I would pretend I was kissing? Like, there's a lot of comparison that goes on. There's a lot of shame, judgment,
Hmm.
especially with sexuality. And so I just want to bring this story of mine to light because I just believe that there is like so many aspects of us that we're afraid to admit about ourselves or afraid to even talk about because we're so concerned about not fitting in and not um, being like the person that we think we should be necessarily.
Hmm.
And I just extend a lot of empathy to people for being different and for challenging those norms like you. That's why I said I was so proud of you for even stepping into this phase of your life that was so unfamiliar.
Yeah, I think that when we are young and we are discovering these things is even for you, for instance, or my partner was like so much harder than for me because I was a little bit older, I had a bit more maturity, I had had some relationships, been traveling super independent. I think when you are so young, it's just so much harder. So, yeah, I have some sympathy for you too because that's really hard.
Yeah, I think that finding community in people who are similar to you is important because when I discovered the term demisexuality and I understood that I was, in fact, included in that label, it gave me this sense of belonging and this acceptance and this, oh my God, like I do belong somewhere, because for much of my life, I thought I'm so different. Nobody will
Mm.
understand me. Nobody will, fall in love with me either because I'm so different with my sexuality. None of this is something I believe now, but I'm saying back then it was a real
Mhm.
challenge because I just thought I'm never going to have a life that other people have. And the FOMO in that, the fear of missing out in that is so strong. That's why I can understand what you're saying about like grieving your past life and what you envision for yourself. That's got to be a really, really difficult thing to work through. So yeah, I'm really like proud of you for being open about this because we need to bring more of these stories to the surface. We need to make this a normal thing, especially for our age group. You're only like 3 years older than me. I don't have a ton of friends who talk about sexuality like this. It's a
Mm.
taboo
Yeah.
thing.
It is. It is. I am pretty open with my friends, but I guess it's because I was so selective of everyone that was around me. And like I told you, this one friend, I just like decided to cut her off, which was really tough because she was one of my best friends for so long. So I definitely think that it is hard. It takes guts and courage. It just sounds easier to stay like where we are comfortable, but I feel so much happier today. I feel like I can be 100% me with my partner like I could never before with any of the other relationships that I had. And we're funny together. Like I have a lot of fun with her. I never had that in a relationship before. We are all day laughing and making jokes and dancing around. And it's just nice. I get to have all these conversations with her and we can open up to each other and I can look back in my past and I'm like, huh, was that a moment that I probably was interested in another woman too, and I just was not aware of it because it did take me a long time calling it curiosity and forgetting about it for over a year completely about her, and then coming back to it because the same feeling was still there when I saw her 1 year later, and we both had matured a lot to um spark that even more in me. And then it took even me going away once again, like we started having something, we started like kissing, and I would touch her and it felt like it was electrifying and it was like bizarre. I was like, I never felt this before, like what is this? But I would tell her every single day, I was like, I'm going to Chile, I'm going to Chile. It was like a warning, don't fall in love with me because I'm leaving. And I loved my life that I had built traveling so much, I didn't want anybody to break it. Imagine a woman that I had never been with one before. I was like, no, 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 there's no space for that here. And then when I arrived in Chile, the first thing I did was FaceTime her, and we were on FaceTime so many hours every day. And I started questioning myself, what am I doing? What is this? And when I was in Chile, I told her every day, I'm going to Argentina. I'm going to Argentina. And then I was always escaping to the next place until I couldn't sleep at night anymore. And I would just be thinking about her all the time. And I was waiting. I would work during the day. I worked for a startup at that time, and then I was waiting until the time that she would get home so I could call her and we could be on the phone and talk until we went to sleep. I would put the phone there and wait, and we would like just fall asleep on a call because that's how much we missed each other. And then I called my mom and the whole thing happened. And then I went back to Lima. So it did take a lot of courage, a lot of time, a lot of patience, I think, from myself. And somehow the universe, in a way, I'm not religious at all. I'm actually like against a lot of the things that religious preach, but I felt like a lot of the things were put in my way, so I could have a cooler life today. It's so much better to be traveling the world with her. It's so much better to share my life with her. And I never felt like a relationship could be so good before. It's way nicer than I could have expected. And I think it's really cool to share that with someone that is having doubts, because then there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I was like, are you just telling me it's hard? Yes, but it's actually very rewarding.
Thank you for sharing about some of the rewards that have come with you just being able to step fully into what's true for you, because I'm sure there's been so many like beautiful things that you've experienced since having these major breakthroughs within yourself. And as much as it's been difficult to really accept this part of who you are, I also believe that this is the most courageous path that you could ever follow. That's exactly what you said, that it's taken you courage to be able to get to where you are. Courage is like the thing that often leads to the experiences in our life that are the most valuable to us and that make us grow the most. So I think it's so important to be open to the fact that like your life could look entirely different than you thought it would look, and it's okay to explore like uncharted territories and to surprise yourself even. um and so I try to like have some flexibility about the way that I envision my own future, knowing that it could take many different unexpected twists and turns. And I have to be open to the possibilities of what that might look like as I go.
Yeah, definitely. It's a journey. Like and it's fun because I am getting to select everything now. And I didn't even know I had this pre-idea of my future. In the moment it hit me, it was something that was just installed in me somehow. And it's really cool to see that now I get to choose. We have conversations about, do we want to have kids? How's that going to look like? Now I am in the middle of the countryside of England, and we are both absolutely loving the experience. I never in my freaking life envisioned myself in the countryside. And now I'm thinking like, oh, maybe I would like to live in the countryside and raise chickens. I'm having lots of fun. Like this is nice. I love it here. Like I love it so much, and I feel like I'm so much happier than all the things that I thought I wanted before, to be living in a big city. My biggest dream in my life was to live in New York City like when I was younger, and all those things are just not making sense anymore. So I'm trying to be open about them and being excited about the fact that I get to choose the people that are around me. I get to choose the future that I will have. I get to make decisions. Like, and that's something I never thought about it before. It's like was always just taken for granted. Now I am handpicking everything.
Yeah, you're in charge of your reality and your future, and you get to be empowered by the choices that you're making instead of being ashamed or in judgment of yourself
Hmm.
about the way you're living. I also want to talk about a couple things that you've mentioned throughout this podcast because I want to make sure I don't miss it. And one of the things you shared was just that you unfortunately had to kind of cut ties with a friend who you didn't feel like was fully accepting your decision to be in a relationship with a woman. And I think for people who are coming out or who are expressing their sexuality with clarity and courage, I think it's actually a really bold move to be out loud about your sexuality or out loud about the changes you're making in your life, because that's what will show you who is here to support you and encourage you and accept you, and who is here to do the opposite. And the people who are here to criticize you or to shame you or to not express support in the highest of ways are really not people that you want to have stick around. I'm not an advocate of necessarily cutting off everybody in your life who hurt you or who make mistakes, because I don't think that's the best way to go. But I do agree that you don't want to let people in your life or continue to let people stay in your life who offer nothing but criticism of you, because that's really not going to be supportive of who you're becoming and the path you're going on. So I think that's a hard thing in and of itself, to let your life decisions show you the people who are meant to be with you along those difficult and courageous decisions that you make. And so, yeah, as hard as it is, I think, to fully express yourself in a very public way, it really does show you like the kind of people that you want to have around based on their responses to you. And the other thing I wanted to talk about with you as we start to wrap up is just the whole like topic of labels and labeling yourself. And I know we all stand somewhere different on this topic. We all have opinions. I know how I feel about labels, and that is like I think it's like what does they call it? Like a double-edged sword. In some ways I think having a label for yourself can be very advantageous, because the label helps you belong to a certain community and can help you feel like you're not alone, or you're not the only one, or you're normal like everyone else. While I also feel that the label can sometimes be constricting, because if you put yourself into a box, then you might feel obligated to stay in that box versus just being fluid and dynamic, right? So I don't know. I
Hmm.
think there's value in having a label, and then sometimes maybe not having a label. But how do you feel about it? It's kind of complicated.
Well, I think it's really good that people have a label because otherwise I wouldn't know where I fit in. If imagine that was like many years before, like back, and I felt exactly the same way that I felt for my partner. Like I looked at her and I felt this curiosity and I kept digging in. In the past, I would probably just have turned the other way and like I'm not looking back, I'm ashamed of this, like I shouldn't feel this way. And because there's a label, a lot of people that opened up before me, I think I get to have it easier than they had, which I'm really grateful for. But at the same time, when I think about myself, and maybe it's because I am not fully found within me, I cannot say that I'm bisexual. I cannot say that I'm demisexual either, which I thought I was probably before. I cannot say that I am heterosexual. Definitely not. It just doesn't sit right when I say it. So it's weird. I usually say, I asked my partner one time and she said, like, how would you define this? She said, I would define that I like you, that I love you. Isn't that enough? And I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. And I don't really question myself on that. Maybe I could a little bit more, but that's how I feel it right
Yeah,
now.
that's okay. Like I said, some people like to associate themselves with labels and others do not. And I think it is a matter of personal preference at the end of the day. I do identify with being demisexual for sure. And I kind of feel like I'm always going to identify with that, just because I simply don't look at a man and think to myself solely based on his physical appearance that I would like to sleep with him or make out with him. I just don't. That does not cross my mind. What crosses my mind is I want to get to know you. You are attractive. I see your physical beauty and I want to know what you're like inside. I think that's a wonderful
Hmm.
sexuality to have, to be honest. I also don't want to
Agreed.
say that
Yes.
like I'm always going to be like this in every circumstance. Because what if, 20 years from now in my 40s, I have this wave of like, I don't know, interest in like more surface level bonds. I don't know. I mean, who knows how my sexuality could change as I get older? It's possible I might find myself in a situation like you. And I don't
Hmm.
want to say that like that's never going to be a possibility for me because literally I've heard stories like Glennon Doyle where out of nowhere your
Hmm.
whole life just changes because of a moment that you have
Yeah.
with yourself. And so I think it's great to be able to have this kind of freedom for yourself about the trajectory of your life and the partners you might have and so forth. Um, because I think when we do hold ourselves to certain standards or rules or whatever it is, that's how shame brews and that's how judgment comes to the surface. And that's how living a constricted life might look. So I'm with you in like just allowing yourself to be flexible in who you are and be dynamic and just roll with what feels aligned and what feels true for you from moment to moment. Let it be what it is. Release the judgments, release the right and wrong, good or bad, and just say, this is what it is. I love this person right now. I don't know who I might love in 5 years, 10 years, but this is what feels good to me in this moment.
Hmm. Yes, 100%. And yeah, you're so right. Like it might change, like we don't know. I might evolve into the idea of like, oh, I'm really bisexual. That's me. Like we'll we'll have to save that for later. Like let's see what happens in a couple
Yeah, and I
years.
also like how you brought to light the fact that you noticed yourself building up these walls and excuses, and you were running away from your now partner because you were afraid to face the fact that you might actually be curious about pursuing a relationship with them. That's like that makes a lot of sense, because we will place like these barriers within our minds in front of us. We'll place these barriers in front of us that are fears, and those fears will not allow us to move forward. And that could be with anything: career, friends, family, potential partners. We all have these blockages that come up. And sometimes we're like, oh, no, 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 I don't want to go there because it feels raw and vulnerable. It feels like something we shouldn't explore at times. But what I say is like where the fear comes up for you is where you want to explore, because that is where the growth is. And
Hmm.
that's probably where your truth is as well. So follow where your truth is, even when that feels like the exact thing you should not follow because so it's so said you shouldn't, or because society said it's not normal or right. Like that's the message that I think I want to share on this podcast today is follow your truth, follow what's aligned for you. And when you do have those moments of like, I can't, this is wrong, I shouldn't, I actually think you should reach out to someone who's had struggles in the particular area that you're struggling with. Because I know when I discovered that I was demisexual, I reached out to a friend who had previously told me that they identified as demisexual. And I felt so much security and comfort in talking to that person because I knew they would understand and get it. No one else would get it the way they got it. So if you're in that position, why don't you talk to someone who's struggled or questioned their own sexuality? If I was ever in the situation you're now in, guess who I'd want to reach out to? Probably you, right? I can't really call Glennon Doyle. So I would talk to you. So yeah, I kind of think, if there's somebody listening who's in this place in their life where they're just questioning and challenging everything about themselves, what would we want to relay to them? And I really think that's what I would want to say. I would say find people who have already walked through the struggle you're walking through, that you trust, that you can confide in, because they will help you come to more acceptance within yourself. The people who are so free about who they are free in their identity are the people who you'll most likely gravitate towards. I know I feel that way. I love people who are just uninhibited in expressing themselves no matter what society says is right or normal. And I want to open up to people like that because I know that they don't have the judgments and the boxes and the limitations and all of that. What would you say, though, to somebody who's struggling with their sexuality, we'll say specifically, and who's like, oh, I don't know, or I'm confused about this and I want to talk about this, but I'm afraid, or I want to accept this, but I know I shouldn't. What would you give them as far as advice goes?
You know, I did this one thing that I think it worked magics for me because I was scared and I didn't know how to go about it. And I told myself, I'm gonna sit down and be quiet for a second, and I'm gonna tell myself that I don't ever have to share with anyone. I can have 30 minutes to be honest with myself. It doesn't matter what it is. And I will hide from everyone, whatever it is. And I just started writing down on a paper, like literally everything that came to mind. And I did write, like, I think I am falling in love for this woman. Like, what the fuck am I gonna do about this? Can I say that? And and I wrote things like, what would my friends think? Are they going to think that I was interested in them? What about when I was in a changing room with women? Like how does that play out? And I was just said like silly things were coming out. And then when I saw everything, I was like, okay, now I get to choose. Do I do something or I don't with it? I did choose to be brave, but before then, I chose to just allow myself to see what it was. Because when we are just thinking, it's really hard to process everything. And I feel like when I write down, at least I cope really well and I get clarity. So allowing myself to have a secret with me was the best thing that I did because then I could take action from that. And I think that just going and seeing people that have done the same, because I didn't have any friends to go to. I didn't know anybody that I could reach out, but I did look into Glenn Doyle podcast because I was like, oh my God, I remember in her book, like everything that happened. And then I started just searching about her, like desperately. And I was like going on Instagram, trying to find people that were gay or like that. Um, like had some similarity to me, and looking into them allowed me to be a little bit more okay with it. So I would say those things really helped me a lot. But then it doesn't get easy to just take this step, and it's you need to understand it, but then to go for it, that's freaking hard. It was not easy.
Mm. Understandably, I haven't been there specifically enough to say I get it fully, but I do understand being
Mhm.
different and I understand learning how to like really embrace that for what it is rather than fight against it and put up the walls and put up the barriers. And so it's something I certainly acknowledge you for is just being in this lovely relationship that you're now in for the last 2 years or so and coming on like being on the other side of all those fears and all of those I can't explore this conversations that you had. It must just feel like so exhilarating and freeing, and I don't know what words you would put on it because it's your experience, but regardless of what it is, it's incredible that you're choosing to use your voice to share about this, to make this a thing that is like acceptable and okay. And I hope people listening can feel a little bit more at home with who they are just by hearing your vulnerable sharing. So thank you for being with us today.
Mm. Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Yes, okay, we'll talk again soon.